Here we go. Extra spiciness on the cards today, ladies and gents. Welcome back to Transfer Talk. However, this video, you guys don't stop hounding me. You don't. It's unrelenting. And whilst that is awesome, it's getting to the point now where we're going to have to talk about it. Fernando Alonso, the man I think most people would love to see back in Formula 1. How realistic is that? Maybe not so much for next year. I think pretty much 2020 now is mostly wrapped up. So the main focus of today's video will be 2021. Can Fernando Alonso, two-time Formula 1 world champion, can he return? Is there a way to play the game of Formula 1, to play the politics, play his cards right, and return to the grid? Let's get the formalities out the way first, and then we'll get into the fun bits. So, if you're new around here, feel free to subscribe. And if you do subscribe and you found the channel for the very first time, hello, and welcome to the team. Apart from that, remember to like if you enjoy. Also, to remember to let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I love it with these transfer talks where we have a little bit of a discussion in the comments. And in the top right-hand corner, you can have your say. You can vote right now. So if you click on that little I button in the top right-hand corner, you can vote for will Fernando Alonso return to Formula 1 in 2021. Right, enough messing. Let's get on with it. Fernando Alonso, 32 Formula 1 victories. Of course, those two awesome world championships all the way back in 2005 and 6 with Renault. His last Grand Prix victory, and this took me by shock a little bit. I don't really know why, but 2013 Spanish Grand Prix. So part of me thinks that's pretty nice that your last ever Formula 1 win is in a Ferrari and in front of your home crowd in Barcelona. That's not too bad. However, that's a very long time since Fernando Alonso's last win in Formula 1. And as we all know, or at least if you keep up to date with Formula 1, he's not racing in 2019. At least he's not racing in Formula 1. He was planning on doing the Indy 500 with McLaren, and that's where I'm going to start today's video, with McLaren. Didn't quite go to plan, so much so that he didn't even qualify for the event. A real embarrassment for Fernando. And reports have come out, and even McLaren themselves have released an official statement all the way back before the summer break announcing that Alonso was splitting his duties with McLaren. However, I think what has to be noted is that he was with McLaren in Monza, showed up to Monza, watched the Grand Prix and was with Team McLaren. Wasn't by himself, wasn't with any other team, but he was in the orange gear, had the McLaren merchandise on and official team wear. So 2021 is where I'm going to base these guesstimates for a potential return. McLaren, I think, and I imagine most of you will agree with me here, they've got a brilliant lineup. This year, McLaren, there's just been that real fresh air about them, that nice buzz within a team, which sometimes teams get a little bit stale. And I'm not blaming that on Fernando Alonso. I'm not blaming that on Stoffel Van Dorn, Eric Boullier. However, Norris and Sainz, since I've been watching Formula 1, this has been one of the best teammate relationships I have ever seen. It's quickly becoming the best bromance in Formula 1. Ricciardo and Verstappen was pretty good, but I think this tops that already, and we're not even a full season through. Norris, young gun, hungry in Formula 1, and I think has proved himself, well, I was going to say fairly well, but I think very capable of being a top-class Formula 1 driver. I think that's more than fair. Whilst his points don't suggest that he's had a brilliant season, there's been many occasions this year. Off the top of my head, Germany, Canada, Belgium, plenty of times where he could have scored big and the car have let him down. It's not been a perfect year for Norris, but I definitely think it's been a really good grounding year for him. On the other side of the garage, well, last year I didn't have to get slated for saying that Carlos Sainz deserved a chance in Formula 1. This year, he's really proved himself, and I'm really happy for the Chile master Carlos, smooth operator, whatever you want to call him. Carlos has really controlled that team, and he's thriving in this environment where not only is he the number one, but he's a respected driver, and I think that's something, whilst he was at Toro Rosso, he didn't potentially feel, and also at Renault, where he was on loan, didn't really feel part of the furniture, if that makes sense. So I don't see McLaren making a switch for Alonso. And also I don't think Alonso would take the gamble to come back to Formula 1 to a team like McLaren. Okay then, that being said, McLaren in 2021 are getting Mercedes engines. So again, that could be a risk. But Mercedes, what about them? Because at the moment, in the car for next year, Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas. Fair play. 2021, you would imagine, they would probably get in one of their young drivers, whether that's George Russell, who's doing next year at Williams, or Esteban Ocon. However, the sticking point there with Esteban Ocon is the fact he's at Renault on at least a 2-year deal. So for 2021, Ocon is not an option. So, if Lewis Hamilton retires or moves to Ferrari or switches team, do Mercedes want to take the gamble and have Valtteri Bottas and George Russell in the car? That's quite an unknown quantity with Russell. And Bottas, is he really a driver Mercedes can depend upon to be that number one driver, to be that superstar they've had in Lewis Hamilton? Is it worth the risk in bringing in Fernando Alonso? And whilst on paper now it looks ridiculous, back in 2012 when Kimi Raikkonen returned with Lotus, that looked ridiculous. Talks about Sebastian Vettel going to Ferrari at the time seemed ridiculous. Daniel Ricciardo moving to Renault seemed ridiculous. That being said, instantly going to change my tune. Mercedes, this would be a huge gamble. And even if Hamilton left and they had to have Bottas and Russell, I think they'd pass on Alonso. Alonso at that point would have been out of Formula 1 for 2 years. Alonso also, we can't forget this, has a negative reputation for poor politics in Formula 1 and disturbing the team behind closed doors. And Mercedes, that have been a team that historically have worked so well since their return to Formula 1, especially in the hybrid era, I don't think they'd want to bring in a driver like Alonso on a short-term deal when they've got someone like Bottas, who, as I mentioned, I don't think's World Championship material. But what Bottas is brilliant at is being that consistent number 2 driver, helping the team pick up points. Look at him this year. I don't think many of us would say he's been brilliant in the second half of 2019. Has gone unnoticed. However, he's picked up a couple of second places and getting the job done and helping them most likely win the Constructors' title in the next couple of rounds. So I don't see him going to Mercedes either. Alonso, from his perspective, if he can get a drive at any of the top 3 teams, I think he'll take it with open arms, with arms wide open. He wants to win. He wants to, first of all, be in Formula 1. I fully believe that. He himself has said he'd love to be in Formula 1, but it's not competitive enough. Ironic, because he went to the WEC and he joined the only team that was any good. I'm not a big WEC fan, so that might be incorrect. However, I'm pretty sure it's not. And his World Championship in his first year in WEC and 2 Le Mans wins probably agree with that statement I just said. I did think Alonso was pretty good in WEC. That's neither here nor there. So Mercedes, I don't see that happening. I know some of you would love that. And if Hamilton leaves, and if Bottas decides he's out, maybe they have to take a gamble with someone like Alonso on a short-term deal. But I think drivers like Verstappen, like Ricciardo, to a team like Mercedes are perhaps a little bit more appealing. So what other options? The list is small because you look at teams like Toro Rosso, you look at teams like Alfa Romeo, Williams, Haas F1. I don't think Alonso's going to any of those. I really think he has to go to a team he feels passionate about. A la Ferrari. We know the stories of Fernando Alonso at Ferrari. Almost, he won his first ever race in Melbourne back in 2010. Almost won in his first year in Ferrari. Won the whole championship almost. Came down to that very last race. Went for Sebastian Vettel in the end. There were 4 drivers actually that could have won the championship on the day. Fernando Alonso's best season, and you can argue about this as much as you like, I think is 2012. That car wasn't great, and yet he dragged it all the way to the final race of the season. One of the best season finales, Brazil 2012. One of the best seasons, definitely, that I've ever witnessed in my life. and yet it didn't quite ever work out with him for Ferrari. Stayed for 2014. The car was a bit of a dog. That's putting it nicely as well. Sorry, Ferrari fans. It wasn't a great time for you. And in typical Alonso fashion, he left just before things started to turn around. Likewise with McLaren this year. And you've got to look at that and say, first of all, is that a trait of Alonso? Does he disrupt things so much that the team can't get the best out of their mechanics, their staff, even their drivers? But you got to say, 2015, they started winning races with Sebastian Vettel. 2016 had a barren year, but then 2017 in that fight for the championship. And you just think to yourself, if Fernando had just stayed a few more years, what could have been in that Ferrari? It's been difficult, 2019, I would say, for Ferrari. Coming out of winter testing, we all thought they had the best car. We all did. Long run pace looked good, quali pace looked good, but it was testing, and you could never fully read into testing. But we all did, and we were all proved mightily wrong. 5 1-2s in a row for Mercedes. See you later, Formula 1 reporters and critics. Second half of the season for Ferrari, 4 pole positions in the row for Charles Leclerc. He has the most pole positions of anyone in 2019 with 6. Their fortunes haven't quite turned around, and strategy, case in point Russia this weekend, it's not been brilliant. Definitely room for improvement. I don't think they have the best car this year. Whilst the second half of the year they've definitely improved the most, I think overall Mercedes have been the team to beat, hence they will win the Constructors. And I know points doesn't tell the full story, but it gives you a good picture. How long will Sebastian Vettel stay round? And I think what also is a very important point, what options are out there for Ferrari? Let's say Sebastian Vettel stays in 2020. He's currently under contract to do so, and I imagine he will do, alongside Charles Leclerc. But if these squabbles, inter-team squabbles between Vettel and Leclerc continue, I personally think Ferrari will side with Leclerc. I think they're fairly similar in talent, actually. And I think on their day, either of them can be winning races. And we've seen that already in 2019. I think that they would choose Vettel to leave. Mainly down to the age factor, in my opinion. Loyalty, is that something you'd really say with Ferrari? And technically, Leclerc has been with the Ferrari family longer than Sebastian Vettel because he was there through his junior career. So, for the sake of this video, let's say Sebastian Vettel leaves. Who do Ferrari bring in? Obvious candidates, again Max Verstappen, again Daniel Ricciardo. And then you look at their young drivers, and I think this is the biggest sticking point with Ferrari. Because at the moment, their main man is Antonio Giovinazzi. And I've said this in a few different videos of mine. Whilst I definitely think there's been improvements from Gio this season, especially in the second half of the year, not so much in Russia, but definitely in Spa before that last lap crash. In Monza, an awesome race. In Singapore, he led the Grand Prix. Yes, circumstance helped him there. But improvements have been made. When you consider his pace and his qualifying gap to Raikkonen at the beginning of the year, improvements have been made. Is he ready for Ferrari? Is he good enough for Ferrari? Give him a little bit more time, but I'm not convinced. In our young driver video, so if you haven't checked that out, feel free to do so. It's an ongoing series we do where there's not a Formula 1 race weekend. We have a look at some of the team's young driver programmes. But Ferrari, whilst it's looking pretty spicy, and they've got a real nice group of talent coming through, I think they're still a few years away. Not even from Ferrari, but even from Formula 1. Mick Schumacher, he won't be moving up to Formula 1 until 2021. So I don't think he's going to jump straight into Ferrari. Likewise with Robert Schwartzman, Marcus Armstrong, it's all talent. Callum Ilott, none of them are moving up to Formula 1 next year. And Ferrari, who were very hesitant to put Leclerc in that car, they're not going to put a rookie in that car. They need experience. So they might look at someone like Bottas. They might even look at someone like Hülkenberg. Alonso would be an interesting choice. If Vettel leaves, to me that indicates there's problems between the teammate dynamic. Bringing in Alonso against a young fiery driver who's hungry for victories, smells a lot like 2007 when he went to McLaren. I'm making out in this video like Alonso's an extremely disruptive force, and I don't really want to do that too much. Because yes, you've got to consider that, but the talent Alonso brings, I personally even feel with 2-3 years out of Formula 1, he'd be able to jump back in and be a race-winning driver. I feel he is one of the best in the world, and by default should be in Formula 1. Being alongside Leclerc, knowing that Alonso loves to be the number one driver, to me that dynamic doesn't work. And that's a spicy hot take, because I know so many of you, and even I would to a degree, would love to see Fernando back in that Ferrari because he would win races. That's the undenying factor here. You put in someone, let's just say Hulkenberg, let's say Kevin Magnussen, those kind of guys that have experience that would perhaps be a short-term option, waiting for a driver like Schumacher or Giovinazzi to come through, but they wouldn't necessarily guarantee podiums, wins. Look at Gasly and Red Bull. So bringing in Alonso for a short-term option would be a big risk. And as I just mentioned, Ferrari, who kept Kimi Raikkonen for so many years, you could argue because of the fact he was so harmonious within the team. He did his job. He doesn't cause upsets, or at least for the most part didn't cause upsets. Love you, Kimi Raikkonen. So I'm not too sure Ferrari would look at Alonso as a realistic option for 2021. Trying to move away from that a little bit. I was going to go on to Red Bull next, but I think to counter what I've just said, perhaps it's best to look at Renault. Because I've said the same for Mercedes, and I've said the same thing for Ferrari. I don't think a team, any team on the grid, maybe Williams if they could get him on an awesome deal, or Haas, but I don't think many teams would take Fernando Alonso on a short deal. He's going to cost a lot of money. He's going to cause upsets because he wants to win races. I totally get that. He's coming to the end of his career anyway. If not, it's already over. That hurt me to say. He wants to win races. He wants to get results. He's going to try and do everything he can to do that, even if that means peeing off the guys who make the engines. Yes, I'm talking to you, Honda guys. So Renault. Renault have already, well, they've said bye-bye to Nico Hulkenberg, a move that I'm still a little bit surprised about, but as the days are going on, I can understand why they've gone with Esteban Ocon. Daniel Ricciardo. I've said many times, I think he's moved to Renault just as a couple of years, just to help position himself better for 2021, so that if a Ferrari seat opens up, if a Mercedes seats open up, it's much easier to move from a midfield team to a top team than it would have been to move from a team like Red Bull to a team like Mercedes. But you can see all my thoughts about that in another video. I don't want to overlap what I've already said. Renault have personally said by 2021 they would love to have one of their young drivers from their Young Driver Academy in the Formula 1 team. Now, that's not specific about what role. It might be a third driver, it might be a reserve driver, but it was indicated a full race driver. Ocon could leave. If Hamilton moves on, they might have to bring Ocon out of Renault, and take him back to Mercedes. Renault might be stuck. They might be in a situation where Ricciardo's gone, where Ocon's gone. They can bring in a young driver, but they need to find someone from somewhere else. Alonso might very well take the risk. 2 world championships with Renault. And you got to say, this year excluded, they have gone forward in every single year since their return. And even this year, I think progress has definitely been made since the first race of the season. Look at Monza, 4th and 5th. That's not bad at all. McLaren have been the better of the 2 Renault teams, but I don't think they've been dreadful. And I think the Renault engine has made a step forward. So actually, this might be a little bit controversial. I think if the option was there, Alonso would go to Renault. They're a team that have the potential, a little bit like Mercedes did in 2014. Renault, one of, if not the biggest car manufacturer in the world, or group company, you know how messy these things get in corporate level. They've got funds. They are committing to Formula 1. They've left Formula E to focus on Formula 1. They've pumped money into signing Daniel Ricciardo, so they want a star driver. And what a story that would be. Not only Alonso returning to Formula 1, but to the team that made Alonso, that put him on the map, that won him those championships. Yes, there was Crashgate and moments that weren't too brilliant, but there's a story to tell there. And I can see that working, which is strange because I can't see it working at Mercedes or Ferrari, but something to me says that, yeah, I can see Alonso going to Renault. And before we get onto the final team, one of the more, you could argue, more obvious teams he's been linked with quite a few times, Formula E. I have to mention it. I know a lot of you hate to hear Formula E. I've said this in the past and I will say it again. I think Formula E will do everything they can to sign Fernando Alonso. Likewise, when Kimi Raikkonen retires from Formula 1, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton. Because right now, what Formula E needs are big names. Look in Season 5. Yes, it's a lovely, shiny new car, and it looks sexy as. Attack mode's brilliant, fan boost is not brilliant. But Felipe Massa, Stoffel Van Dorn, Pascal Wehrlein, whilst they're not A-star, world-class, well, that's a little bit harsh, well-known drivers, I think is what I'm trying to say, and maybe casual Formula 1 fans wouldn't know them. Hardcore Formula 1 fans and regular Formula 1 fans are more than aware who Felipe Massa is, more than aware Jean-Eric Vergne, and it gets that interest. So if Fernando Alonso goes to Formula E, I mean, look at an IndyCar. He did one race in IndyCar, and half the Formula 1 community went to watch it. I'd never seen IndyCar before until that race. WEC as well. I'd never really studied Le Mans until Fernando Alonso went there. And that might very well be my own personal experience, but I've talked with other members in the Formula 1 community, some of my own friends who aren't even big Formula 1 fans, and they've said, yeah, I gave it a try just to see Alonso. So Formula E, they will do everything. I also think it wouldn't be too bad for Alonso to go there. Try and prove his worth, and I think he would by far be the best driver in Formula E, but he talked about this Triple Crown. Formula E, we have no idea the heights it's going to reach, whether it'll even just drop off at the end of next year. It's a complete unknown. But why not go to Formula E, pick up a couple of titles, win the races, so 10, 20 years down the line, he can say, I was one of the original champions. It's worth a go, in my opinion. But if you can get a Formula 1 drive, you've got to pick that, especially how things stand at the moment. And the final team, we've got to talk about it, Red Bull. They're in a predicament, I think it's more than fair to say. The game of chairs, musical chairs, whatever you want to call it, is quieting down a little bit. Alex Albon, I've been very impressed with. I was definitely critical, I think it's fair to say, about Red Bull's decision to bring him into the big team and with the big boys, the big guns. I was critical because I didn't think Albon had enough time. If Gasly hadn't had enough time, why were they choosing to bring in Albon? But I always say, and I've said this about Haas keeping Grosjean, I've said this even about Renault moving Hülkenberg on, you never know what happens behind closed doors. You never know what deals are in place. And ultimately, you never know what the pace is. There might be, look at Max Verstappen in Russia, 4th place, on his own. But the guys in the factory looking at his data and might be thinking, wow, this is an incredible drive. We're not privy to that as the public, which is fair enough. It's Formula 1. It's sport. It's fair game. So, I think they'll keep Albon in that car. I think the biggest way, and pretty much the only way Alonso gets into that Red Bull seat is, one, if Albon stays in that car next year but doesn't do good enough, Kvyat has already moved on, and Gasly's doing okay in a Toro Rosso. They might have to take a gamble with an outside driver. But even then, I think they'd pick someone like Hülkenberg, who isn't going to necessarily challenge Max Verstappen as much, and will be a lot more harmonious than Alonso would be with Max Verstappen as a teammate. However, can we just picture Max Verstappen and Alonso in a team? Woo, they would do some serious bits, but likewise, there would be some serious flames in team meetings and team radios. If Max Verstappen leaves, this is where it gets interesting. Because we've seen, they don't want to bring Kvyat back. They're still, Helmut Marko, bless him, he's a stubborn guy. He's a personality in Formula 1, and As much as we love to hate him, he's a personality, and we need more of that sometimes in Formula 1. And I think that's why a lot of us miss Alonso. So, if Verstappen goes, is Albon ready to be number one? Is Gasly ready to be number one? Is Kvyat ready to be number one? The answer to all those questions is no. And do Red Bull take the risk of having Albon and Gasly in the car? Albon and Kvyat, I also think no. And you look at some of their young drivers coming through. The most high profile, Yuri Vips, F3, didn't win the title this year, may very well stay next year again in Formula 3. If he's lucky, he might get to Formula 2, but if he's lucky, if he can find a seat. So even he, Red Bull's next biggest thing, and that's not me dissing Yuri Vips, by the way. I quite like him as a driver, and I think he can do well. But he won't be ready for Formula 1, or at least the Red Bull seat. Maybe Toro Rosso in 2021, but not the Red Bull seat. Although it is Red Bull, so we never quite know what they're doing. But I think if Verstappen leaves, and I've been floating around this for a while, they have to find someone else. More importantly, they have to find a number one with experience, but also who can win races. That might be bringing back a Sebastian Vettel. That might be bringing back a Daniel Ricciardo. That might be bringing in Fernando Alonso. But again, is that a short-term thing? Do they want someone to come in for 5 years? They would. I'm sure Red Bull would love for Max Verstappen to stay with them for the rest of his career. I'm not too sure Max Verstappen would be too keen on that, considering Red Bull's pace over the last few years. I don't think Alonso will go to Red Bull. I think it would have to be Verstappen moving on and Gasly not being great, Albon being okay, and then being desperate to find a world-class driver. So, do I think he's going to return in 2021? Not really, which has been pretty obvious from the go. But so many of you were asking me to do this video, I felt I wanted to sit down and talk about it because there's so many avenues this could go. And at the end of 2011, Robert Kubica, life-changing injuries. If you'd have told me in 2019 he'd be back in Formula 1, I wouldn't have believed you. I would have laughed, quite frankly, because it just seems so unrealistic. And Kubica, what a hero. It might not have been the dream return in 2019, but he'd done it. He scored a point. He survived the Singapore Grand Prix. I'm so impressed with that man. I can't deny. So for someone like Fernando Alonso, who has 2 world championships, who is still trying to stay racing, who is hungry. You can tell he's still hungry to be back in Formula 1 because he shows up to Grand Prix. He still talks about Formula 1. He wants to win races. And you know what? If an opportunity opens and if things go the right way, like at a team with Renault, like at even a potential Red Bull, even as far-fetched as it sounds, if he works with Williams behind closed doors, and Williams are doing absolute bits, they found the biggest loophole, he might very well go for it. It's unrealistic. He should be in Formula 1. He's good enough for Formula 1. But poor Fernando, he didn't play his card right when he was in Formula 1. The politics, which some drivers, Michael Schumacher, a perfect example, some drivers are just brilliant at the Formula 1 politics. Other guys, like Alonso, it doesn't quite go their way. But we've learned in Formula 1, anything, and I mean anything, is possible. Right, that was a long video. I hope you've enjoyed. That's the main thing. Lots to go through there, lots to take in, divulge, and talk about in the comments. So hopefully I'll see you down there in a moment. If you're new around here and you've made it this far, blimey. First of all, thank you. And if you choose to subscribe, welcome to the team. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.